Poor Andrew Johnson. I mean, how do you follow up a performance like Lincoln? Andrew Johnson was a unique character. He was from Tennessee, and he was one of the only members of Congress and Senate to not defect to the Confederacy. In fact, he held his seat the entire war. Um, he would tell people that Tennessee left him. He didn't leave Tennessee. And when Lincoln was running for re-election, the strategy was, well, what if we get a Southerner who is loyal to the Union to try to help round out the ticket? And when Lincoln gave his second inaugural address, which was a brilliant speech talking about with malice towards none and charity for all and following the better angels of our nature, and actually the heavens opened and sun shone directly on him. I mean, it was an amazing event. Right after that, or right before it, Andrew Johnson gives a speech and he's drunk. He forgets the name of important people on the podium. He slurs his speech. I mean, it is awful. It's so embarrassing. People want to get up and just take him off the stage. The contrast couldn't have been any greater. And the contrast didn't stop there. One of General Sherman's moments of brilliance was he gave a military order, and as he was going through the South, he started to break up these massive plantations, and he gave small plots of land in a mule to former slaves. You see, Sherman believed that, okay, we're fighting this war to end slavery, and if we just turn around and give the slaves back to their masters to work for them, this whole war would be in vain. The only way these slaves can improve themselves and rise up in society is to be able to provide for themselves. He knew that economic equality was very important, and he said we've got to give each of these families the opportunity to better themselves through work and labor, and so they can provide for their families. And so that's how things were until after the war, when all of the southern plantation owners started making trips up to Washington, D.C. They howled about how their lands had been stolen and confiscated, and how the government had no right to come into their plantations and give their land to the slaves. And Andrew Johnson, who had been he'd never been a wealthy man. He had never, living in Southern society, he had never been accepted by that upper echelon of planters, now saw these men who had rejected him as a young man coming to him, literally getting on their knees, begging him for their land back. And the temptation was just too great. This was his chance to get in with the Southern plantation owners, to become one of the elite. And so, hiding behind a mask of magnanimity and forgiveness and grace, he said, of course we will give you your land back. Of course it is wrong for us to take your land and give it to the slaves. And so Sherman's order that was given in the field was annulled, and the land was taken away from all the former slaves. And sharecropping became the new thing. Sharecropping is when you're technically free, but you're living on someone else's land, and to work that land, you have to buy the equipment from him, you have to buy the seed from him, you have to give him a large portion of whatever you produce. And guess who gets to set all the prices for everything, for the rent of the land, for the rent of your small cabin, for the rent of the landowner? In fact, there were even sharecropping rules that said, as a sharecropper, you could not leave your rented land without the permission of the landowner. So it was basically slavery, except now the plantation owners weren't responsible for providing food and clothing and shelter. That's on you. You're free. You have to take care of yourself, but you're still living on my land, and I still control you economically. Andrew Johnson was impeached by the radical Republicans as they tried to push for more equality and more freedoms for the former slaves, and Andrew Johnson just kept vetoing everything Congress pushed at him. It's crazy. We're still fighting or struggling in some of the same issues that were facing men like Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Johnson. And I can't help but wonder if Sherman's order had gone through, and if every freed slave was given a plot of land and a mule and allowed to work for themselves, if things would be different now. One of the things that made Lincoln so strong was that he knew what was right, and he didn't care if it was popular or not. And one of the things that made Andrew Johnson so weak was that he knew what was right, but he cared more about being accepted and popular. Your legacy is going to depend on whether you fall into the Lincoln camp or the Johnson camp. You see, all of us, even though we disagree on many things, we do have an internal moral compass. And even if mine is different from yours, we all know what the right thing to do is. And the temptation is to give in to fear and to break our own codes. You see, sometimes we give in, like Johnson, to be popular. Or maybe we're afraid of losing our jobs, or we're afraid of not being successful. But fear is a big thing that keeps us from doing what we believe is right. Now, Lincoln was a courageous man. George Washington was a courageous man. Think of any of your heroes. They were courageous men and women because they did what they believed was right. And even if we don't agree with everything they thought, we admire their steadfastness in doing the right thing. One of the greatest ways that we can inspire ourselves to follow in their example is to learn about them. You see, what we look at, we become like. That's why when you were a little kid, your parents wouldn't let you watch certain TV shows. They didn't want you to become like that. And now we have the opportunity to choose, well, who do we want to look at? If we look at men like Andrew Johnson, we become a little bit like them. If we look at men like Sherman, we become a little bit like them. And so today I just want to remind you to look up. Carl Jung, a famous psychologist, he was a disciple of Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. He had a theory, and he said, psychoanalysis, going to a psychiatrist and laying on the couch and all that stuff. He said, you know what? There might be another solution. If we could focus on the epitome of goodness, if we could find a person who is so perfect and so good, and if we focused on them and looked at them, then we might not need to delve into our past and do all of this psychoanalysis. And when I heard him say that, it was crazy, because it's like, that's what worship is. Worship is looking at God. It's looking up. It's realizing how good God is. And that focus ennobles us. It makes us better people. And so today I want to encourage you to not be like Andrew Johnson, but to be like Lincoln, who every day had some time where he looked up. This world does not need people to be popular. This world does not need people who are fitting in. This world needs people who are noble and good and kind, and who will do the right thing, though the heavens may fall. And you are one of those people. You may not see it, but God does. He believes in you, and that's why he's given you your moment of destiny, your talents, your job, your opportunity to live in this time of chaos, because he believes that you will be a light. So remember that God's got this. You don't have to be afraid. Be who God made you to be, because you are good. God bless.